Hi everyone, welcome to the session, Creating and Using Web Tools and Geoprocessing Services. My name is Sheng Lin, and I'm a product engineer of Geoprocessing Service team. My colleague Simon Swall, he is not available today, so I will be hosting the whole session. Now this session is for users who has experiences to publish and consume web tool from ArcGIS Pro. And they want to know more about publishing and consuming web tool and GP service with Python. Okay, also from now on, I will be using the term GP service rather than geoprocessing services to make it simple. So here's the overview of this session. I will go through first the introduction to clarify the differences between a web tool and GP service. I will also explain the requirements for the software you need and the login account. And second, I will show how to author and design script tool, and also the Python script part that runs the tool before you're publishing the web tool. And third, I will cover the core function of publish web tools and GP service with two demos. The first one, I will show how to publish web tool, and second one, I will show how to publish GP service, all from Pro. And fourth, I will show how to consume functions and its features. And follow up with the third demo. That demo will show how to consume web tool and GP service. And fifth one is the advanced considerations, and that such as third-party libraries deployment, and publishing and consuming from ArcMap and Notebook, which is a new feature in Pro 2.5. Last but not least is the resources, the document resources related to this session. And I also will show you the new features we have from Pro 2.3 to 2.5, so you can take advantage of those new features. All right, so let's begin. Introduction, I will show you the concept and the requirements. All right, so the differences between a web tool and geoprocessing service is web tool you publish from both Pro and ArcMap to ArcGIS Enterprise. But after you publish, there's a type, it's called tool, appear in the portal item. And behind this portal item, there's a GP service on the federated server. On the other hand, a GP service, you publish to standalone server. Also, you can publish from ArcMap or Pro, but there's no portal associated with it. So that's the main difference. All right, requirements. First, let's talk about software. If you want to publish a web tool, you need to have Pro 1.4 and above. But we always recommend you utilize the latest, you use the latest version so you can utilize the newest features. Now, if you want to publish a GP service, you need to have Pro 2.3.1 and above. But again, we always recommend you use the latest version, which is 2.5 for now. And once you have a software, you need to have a login account. For web tool, you need to have an account with the privilege of at least publisher. So it's publisher and administrator. But be careful, if you have a publisher account, make sure you don't use the default publisher role. if you are an administrator, you can create a customized publisher role in Portal and turn on the option of Publish Web Tool, then assign the users to this customized role. If you want to publish to GP service, on the other hand, you want to have create a server connection, okay, or .ArcGIS file. This server connection, you need to have administrator account, no publisher. All right. So once you have the requirements, let's look at the code. Now, before you publish, you do need to design and author your script, both in your script tool and your pre-publishing script, which is like you call this script tool. Let's look at first those data, how to prepare the data in your script tool. Now, before I start, you need to know, during publishing, our algorithm is going to scan your code and check if there is any data needs to be copied to the server or referenced by the server. So you need to make sure your data is found and copied correctly. Also, once you publish a script tool, it's going to be on a server. So the way it runs is slightly different than on a client. You need to ensure the performance is up to speed. So how do we achieve those two? First of all, avoid hard coding your data. By that I mean provide your input parameter by using ArcPy that get parameter as text. And this is just the same way as you expose your parameter in Model Builder. And second, if you do have hard-coded data that is not exposed as a parameter, which is we call project data, make sure to build it dynamically. You can use OS, the path that join, to connect your path and file name. So in this way, your data can work in any operating system. Or if you have your own module you want to import, use the path that append. So in that case, your module will be added to the path list. And also, you want to write your intermediate or temporary output data to in-memory. In this way, if you write it in memory, when you run on the server, it will run much faster than save on the hard disk. So those are the 3 tips when you write your script in your script tool. Let's look at the pre-considerations outside of your script tool. That is the part you want to run the script tool and before you publish. Now the first one is called input mode. So what is input mode? Input mode decide how the users how you want the users to provide the input when running as a web tool or GP service. If you run from ArcGIS Pro, you'll notice for each parameter the 3 input modes, and that's user-defined, choiceless, or constant. Now, in previous slides, I mentioned that you need to expose your input as a parameter. When running a script tool or model tool, actually, In ArcGIS Pro, the way the users provide the input depends on each parameter data type. But when running as a web tool or GP service, the way to provide input is different. It doesn't depend on your original data type. Now, when you publish from GUI, you do have this option, 3 options allow you to choose. But running from the script tool, there's no such GUI allow user to choose from. It all depends on how the users provide the input initially before running the tool. Now, let's see how it works, and using feature as an example. So the first one is user-defined. That means the user provide their own input for web tool. So when you run the tool, if the feature input is a feature set, a service, or class, after it's published, the input mode is going to show as user-defined. And the second one is choice list. If you make a layer rather than a feature set or feature class, during publishing, your data is going to be copied to the server or reference, depends on how you set up. And so if you want the users, you want to limit the data to users, you want to pick this choice. The last one is constant. Constant means, of course, fixed value. Constant, after you publish, the user cannot see the parameter. The 2 workflows you might be using this constant. The first one is if you want the users to use a fixed value and do not wish to expose this input as a parameter. If that's the case, you can set the tool and the parameter name for this parameter called constant values of the function ArcPy that creates GPSD draft, which I will explain in more detail later. Okay. And the second case is, the second workflow is if the input data type is not supported on the server, such as workspace, like a folder is a workspace. And during publishing, you don't need to do anything. Our algorithm will convert your parameter to a constant, and then behind the scene in the web tool, you use the default value you used when running the tool. All right, so that concludes the input mode. A second pre-publishing consideration is, do you want the data be copied or referenced? Also, we're talking about some validation. Now, okay, the first one, data copied or referenced, it applies to non-user defined data. And that includes like your script tool project data or the input data you provide during running the tool with the input mode of layer, choice list, or constant. If you decide to reference the data, you need to ensure there's a copy of the data in the reference folder or reference enterprise geodatabase. Then you register this folder or database on the server data store, okay? Not ArcGIS data store, it's called server data store. So during publishing, server will check the data store, and if it finds the copy of data, it references it rather than copy your data to the server. If you don't do any reference, during publishing, your data, again, will be packaged and copied to the server. How do you decide when to copy or not? Well, if the data takes too long, if it's big and takes too long to copy to the server, you might want to consider reference it. And the other one we need to talk about is the tool validation script. Now, each tool has a validation part. If you publish it as an asynchronous tool and execute it by submit job, the validation should occur. Well, but check it. This is not as used as common. All right, so next we're going to talk about the publishing functions, followed with 2 demos. Now, this is the real hardcore publishing part. Now, before you publish, make sure your tool running in Pro is running successfully. If it's not successful, you cannot proceed. Okay. So once you run the tool successfully, you get the result object or result file. Then, to publish as web tool, you need to log in your portal using ArcPy, the sign in to portal, and provide your portal URL and login credentials. After that, you use ArcPy to create GP SD draft. SD draft means service definition draft, which is a file contains the information about the server and a set of service properties. With this function, you need to pass 4 required parameters, which is your result file obtained from running the tools, and then the path of your service definition draft. Then you specify your service name and server type. In this case, if you have web tool, if you log in, the type is my hosted services. You can also configure other properties, other than those required parameters, such as synchronous or asynchronous, or maximum returning records, or even message level. Once you run this function, it returns a list of records that shows the errors or warning when you create this service definition draft. Make sure you don't have any error message before you proceed, just like you did when running from GUI. If you have errors, there's no way you can publish. And next, there are 2 functions from server module. The first one is stage service. The next one is upload service definition. Stage service, you pass your service definition draft, and then you create a service definition. Now, a service definition draft is like a blueprint. You don't have the real things. You don't have the real object there. But service definition is based on this blueprint, I package all the necessary data, tool, or file. With that, then you call the upload service definition. You pass this service definition and provide your server URL of your portal. That's a federated server URL. And then you upload to the server and unpack ready on the server to be used. Okay, so next, let's look at the demo. The first one I will show publish web tool. So here I have a map. This is the 911 call on the west side of Portland, Oregon. And I'm interested in the hotspot of this area. How do I proceed? First, I already have a model tool. Let's look at this model tool. And first I pass my 911 calls as a parameter, which is a feature class, to collect events. What collect events does is it will consolidate these coincident points and make the weighted output feature points. With that, I pass to hotspot analysis with my distance method as a parameter. Then I get the hotspot output. But those hotspot output are still point features. I'm interested in interpolate this as an area hotspot, not a point hotspot. So what I did is I used the nature neighborhood to convert the points, interpolate the points as a raster output. Then I reclassify this output. But then I want to get the feature rather than raster. So I call the raster to polygon to get my feature output. Okay. So with that, let's see how the equivalent script tool of this model tool. All right, so here's my hotspot analysis script tool. And the same, I have 3 parameters. The first one is my 911 calls, which is a feature class. The second one is a raster that I passed as a raster layer. It's a cell size when I convert the point to raster. And the third parameter is distance method, which is string. So once I have those input, the first one is I pass those calls to collect events, and I get my weighted output. Then I pass my weighted output to hotspot analysis. Yeah, and then I get the hotspot output. Now notice all this output I have here, I use in memory rather than write to disk space. Next one is nature neighbor. So with my hotspot output, and I pass my cell size raster layer, I get the nature neighborhood raster. I reclassified it. And the last one is the raster to polygon conversion, and I get my output. I write my output to my Scratch folder. Okay. Let's go back to the script tool and see what it looks like. So that's my hotspot. And you can get my output, get my input from calls, my layer input from TIFF. I'm going to give the method Manhattan, and then you're going to run it. Now, to save time, I already run it, and this is what it looks like when I get the output. Okay, so I have my script tool ready. I'm ready to publish. Let's look at the publish web tool script. Remember in the slides we talked about sign-in portal. The first thing you need to do is make sure you sign the portal. So I call ArcPy.sign-in portal. So once you sign in, okay, so let's run it. Once I sign in, I will run a hotspot script, the script tool. Let's look at this hotspot script. I have 3 inputs. The first one is input feature class. The second one I use make raster layer. That's a layer. And the third one is a string. Okay, so since the first one is a feature class, you're expecting after you publish, it's going to be user defined. And the second one is a layer. So you expect after you publish, it's a choice list. The data is going to be copied to the server. And the third one is string, and that's, you don't need to copy, reference this because it's string. But here, I want to make it as constant. I don't want the user to change. So our next function, ArcPy to create SD draft, I can specify my constant value. Okay, let's look at the first 4 required parameters. So I pass my result file after I run the tool, and I pass my SD draft file. I give the service name, hotspot web201, and then I'm specifying my server type, which is my hosted service. And last one here is constant values. Okay, so I specify my tool name, hotspot script, that's my tool name, and then the variable name, distance, the distance method. Okay, so once I run this, okay, I should be able to get the analysis message. Okay, I'm not sure you can see it, but the message here says, hey, your layer data, the tip file, is not on the server. It will be copied to the server. All right. So once I have that ready, I'm ready to publish. So next one I call stage service. I pass my SD draft, and I save all my surface definition. And the last one is upload surface definition, and this is my server URL. I have my config file behind the scene. I call my federated server, and I pass my server URL, and then copied it. Okay, so to save time, again, I already pre-published my service. Let's look at the web tool I publish. So to look at your web tool, go to portal pane in our catalog, and here's hotspot web201 I just published. So you double click, and that's my task of my web tool. Now notice we have 3 parameters, right? One is called the user defined, and that's what user defined looks like. User can provide input from 3 different ways. And you have a cell size, and this is hard-coded on the server, right? Because it passes a layer, and the data copied to the server, and now it's provided on the server side. For web tool, you have output feature service. This is an option parameter. You don't have to write the output to this feature service. But if you want to persist your output, you can definitely write it, give this output service output feature service name. All right. So if you run it, this is. If you run it, this is the output it looks like. That you will have return your feature service. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, if you check your source. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so if you check your source, yeah, anyway, but that's your output feature service, okay? So let's back to the slides. The next one is publishing. So next one is publishing functions for GP service. To publish as a GP service, you use the same function as publish as web tool, except you don't need to log in portal because there's no portal. Also, the server type of create service definition draft, create GPSD draft is ArcGIS server. It's not my hosted services. That's for web tool. Okay, so for GP services, ArcGIS server. The other difference is in ArcPy upload service definition. Here you use server connection file, the .ArcGIS file, rather than the server URL. So those are the two main differences. Okay, so next look at the second demo of a publishing GP service. So as you can see, from the first, you don't have, I specify the connection file, the .ArcGIS file. Then you run the tool, that's pretty much the same as you run from web tool. I run the hotspot script. Now, in this case, rather than copy my layer file, my raster layer to the server, I'm going to reference it. So I already save a copy of my raster in a remote UNC path in a folder. So after that, I add the data store by calling ArcPy, add data store item. Yeah, and for requirements for the parameters, I pass my connection file and my data store data type is folder. Then I specify my connection name. And here's the most important. I have my server path, and that path I specify in my config file. It's a UNC path located on my network. That's where, during publishing, the server can reference that UNC path. And then my client path, and that's my workspace, where I save my local data. So after I add the data store, you're ready to publish by reference. There's also slightly different if you publish by reference. So look at here. I have ArcPy.create SD draft, and again, I have 4 required parameters: result, SD draft, path, and service name, and then server type. Now notice for GP service, the server type is ArcGIS server. It's not my hosted services. That's for web tool. In addition, to publish by reference, you need to, or publish from GP service, provide your connection file. Then, this is the most important, set your copy to server parameter to false, because it's by reference. And actually, by default, this is set to false. And I also want to show messages after I publish in order to debug. So I set that to info for this parameter show message. And again, I set my constant here. Okay, so if I do that, it's going to be by reference. And after I call this function, I will return a list of message. And the message will show no error and no warning. And after that, I can go ahead to publish by using stage and then upload service definition. Now notice the second parameter of this upload service definition is connection file. Okay, it's not server URL. And that's another difference. Okay, so after publish, let's look at it. I already pre-published the GP service. Now, for GP service, you cannot check from portal because there's no portal. But you can check it from your connection file. And this is my connection file, .AGS, and this is the GP service I just published. Okay, and it looks the same. Well, yeah. So that's my parameter. So with that, I'm ready to consume. Right. Let's look at the consume functions. All right, consume functions. To consume a web tool or GP service, you use ArcPy import toolbox or add toolbox function. And you pass your server URL and then your web tool or service name, and then pass your credentials to get hold of your web tool or GP service. After that, you run like a desktop tool by calling ArcPy, the web tool name, and then your task name. And then you pass your parameters. Now this is important. Like when you consume the web tool, at the end of each parameter, we add an extra, and that's available only for feature. Okay, you can for output feature. So you can write this output as a feature service that I already showed you from the GUI. And this extra parameter is called Esri _ out _ feature _ service and _ name. So if you specify a value for this feature service output, you will get the output. Another way to consume is use REST API. Most likely you might be using it for automation or testing. Right? That you can use requests or JSON modules to get hold of your task and run it. But we're not going to talk too much about it because that's mostly for testing and some automation work. But more than likely you'll be using ArcPy functions. All right. So next, let's look at the demo of a consume web tool and GP service. Let's look at the consume web tool first. So here I call ArcPy the import toolbox, and I pass my server, the federated server URL. And this is my service, my web tool name, and the next two is my credentials. So once I get hold of my toolbox, I call ArcPy, and my toolbox name, and that's my task name, right? And I pass my input. Here I use feature class, and my raster input, that's the layer, So this is a layer, it's already on the server, so you don't need to specify the data. And last but not least is the output feature service name. Here I give my output feature service name and run it. If you run it, you will generate the output feature service on the server. So you will go ahead to run it and get the results. Now make sure, sometimes it takes time to get the results, if you have a large output. So you need to make sure first, to get it correctly, you want to check the status. If this is 4 means it's successful. Then you proceed to get your output. Okay, that's it. It's that simple. It's very similar to consume a GP service. Again, I also call import toolbox, and I pass my standalone server URL and my service name and credentials. And then here, my input calls, I pass as a layer, actually. Yeah, because the user defined, you can pass it anything, feature class or layer. So here I just make a layer out of a feature service already published from my other server. And in GP service, you don't have the option of output feature service, right? Because that's only available for enterprise. So I just give my raster and no output feature service. And again, you can run it and get the output. Once you get the output, it's saved in memory, and then you can use copy feature and save it in your drive. All right. So consume service is very straightforward and simple for both GP for web tool and GP service. All right, let's talk more about more advanced considerations. Now, sometimes in your script tool, you might have third-party libraries or modules that obviously is not there on the server. So you need to think about how to deploy those third-party libraries on the server. To do that, first you need to log in server machine, and then use the command prompt as an admin. Then you clone the server's default Python environment with a new environment name, such as new env name, using conda clone command. And then you activate the clone environment by running pro swap, new environment name. After that, you can start to install the third-party Python packages by running conda install. Then you restore your ArcGIS server service from the Windows Task Manager. Okay. Now those are just a brief instructions. I will show more detailed instructions. I will give you a link that shows all the detailed steps of how to deploy at the end. Okay, you might want to ask, okay, all you talked about is publishing and consuming from Pro. What about ArcMap? What about the new features that I can use from Notebook? Well, if you publish and consume from ArcMap, now ArcMap doesn't have the option of my hosted services. All right, so whatever you did describe previously, you use the same way as publish to standalone, which means you have to use the connection file, right, to publish and consume. For Notebook, you use Python API. Now in Notebook you cannot publish like the way we did. From the scratch. Using Python API. You can definitely use ArcPy to do whatever you did as in the regular Python. But if you use Python API, you can only upload service definition with Python API. You can also consume web tool or GP service using Python API, but that's not our. I'm not going to cover that. You can always refer to some document about this using Python API to publish and consume. Last, I want to say if you publish the same service frequently in Pro, save your service definition file, and then publish by calling ArcPy upload service definition. You don't need to start from the scratch. That will save you time tremendously. So with that, I'll conclude our session here. But I first talked about the major web tool new features from Pro 2.3 to 2.5, as well as Enterprise 10.7 to 10.8. For Pro 2.3, 4, and Enterprise 10.7 and 10.7.1, we have those three features we already covered in this session, which is the output feature service for when consuming your web tool. Also published to standalone server from Pro 2.3.1. And that's the script tool, but if you from a GUI, it's Pro 2.4. You can also deploy customized Python package. That's the third-party Python package on the server. You can also deploy R for ArcGIS. We also support different data types, like filters and field. They used to be static, but now you can select field and filters. The last one is you can deploy your job directory to cloud, such as Azure, because the default used to be on the server, but now you can deploy that to cloud. For 2.5, for 2.5, and the Enterprise 10.8, you can specify environmental variables from the client. So when you run the web tool, it doesn't have to use the default environmental variables on the server. You can customize those variables from the client side. We also provide the image service URL for raster input. And here is the list of those useful links that shows the documentation, pretty much what I have covered in this session. The first one is sharing web tool with Python, and that covers pretty much all this optimization of the script tool we covered in this session. If you don't know much about sharing web tool and GP service, those two are a good link to have an overview of sharing or publishing web tool and GP service. And this is the link to show third-party Python packages. If you want to know more about accessing web tool from Notebook, here's the good link. And the rest of them covers the major function of publishing web tool, if you want to know more about each parameter. So with that concludes our sessions. This recording will be available about a week later online. You can search about a week later. And also, if you have questions or comments, please go ahead to write on the GeoNet. I will check it once in a while to answer your question. Okay? So with that, I hope this will help you understand to use and consume, to publishing and consume web tool and GB service better. Thank you.